Some people spend their entire lives learning how to fight. Others discover in a single moment that survival has taught them everything they needed to know. This is the story of Sarah Chen, a 22-year-old woman who walked into basic training believing she had to prove her strength, only to learn that true power comes from knowing exactly when to use it. What happened on that humid August evening would change not just her life, but the entire structure of military training at Fort Jackson. This is a story about courage, justice, and the thin line between following orders and protecting yourself when the very person meant to lead you becomes the threat. Sarah Chen had never imagined herself in the military. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, she was the quiet girl who spent her lunch breaks in the library, the one who volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, and who cried during sad movies. Her parents owned a small Chinese restaurant where she waited tables through high school, saving every tip for college. But when her father's medical bills started piling up after his heart attack, and her younger brother needed braces, college became a distant dream. The army recruiter who walked into the restaurant one Tuesday afternoon painted a different picture: steady income, medical benefits for her family, education opportunities, and a chance to serve something bigger than herself. 6 weeks later, Sarah found herself on a bus heading to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, her long black hair cut short, her civilian clothes packed away, and a mixture of fear and determination churning in her stomach. The other recruits on the bus were loud, some bragging about their high school football careers, others joking nervously about what lay ahead. Sarah stayed quiet, watching the landscape change from city to sprawling military base, wondering if she had made the right choice. Basic training began the way Sarah expected: chaos. Drill instructors shouting, recruits scrambling, everything moving at a pace that seemed designed to break you down. Their company was led by 3 drill instructors. Drill Sergeant Martinez was the senior instructor, a career soldier with 20 years of service who ran everything by the book. Drill Sergeant Thompson was the encourager, tough but fair, someone who would stay late to help struggling recruits with their rifle assembly. And then, there was Staff Sergeant Derek Kovac. Kovac was different from the beginning. While the other instructors yelled with purpose, teaching through controlled intensity, Kovac's anger felt personal. He was a massive man, 6'4" with shoulders that seemed to fill doorways, and he carried himself with an aggressive energy that made recruits instinctively step back when he approached. His face was weathered, marked by a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw, and his eyes had a coldness that never seemed to warm, even when he smiled. In the first week, Sarah noticed how Kovac singled out certain recruits. Not just for mistakes, which was expected, but with a particular cruelty that went beyond training. Private Morrison, who stuttered when nervous, found himself doing push-ups until his arms gave out while Kovac mocked his speech impediment. Private Chen, no relation to Sarah, was called racial slurs disguised as nicknames. And the female recruits received special attention that made everyone uncomfortable. Sarah tried to stay invisible. She followed orders perfectly, kept her bunk inspection ready, and pushed herself to meet every physical standard. She told herself that this was just part of the process, that drill instructors were supposed to be hard. But, as the weeks progressed, she couldn't ignore what she was seeing. It started with recruit Jessica Rodriguez. Jessica was a former college athlete, confident and strong, someone who excelled at every physical challenge. Kovac seemed to take her confidence as a personal insult. During PT one morning, when Jessica completed an obstacle course faster than some of the male recruits, Kovac made her run it again. And again. And again. By the 6th time, she was stumbling, dehydrated in the Carolina heat. When she finally collapsed, Kovac stood over her and called her pathetic. Sarah helped Jessica to the medical tent that afternoon. As they walked, Jessica's voice was quiet but shaking with anger. "He does this to all of us," she said. "The women, I mean. Haven't you noticed? He finds reasons to get us alone, to make us do extra drills. Last week, he cornered Emma in the equipment room and stood so close she couldn't move. He didn't touch her, but he didn't have to. He's testing us, seeing who'll break." Sarah had noticed. She had seen Emma's pale face when she returned from equipment inventory, the way Private Michaels flinched whenever Kovac walked past, the whispered conversations that stopped whenever an instructor approached. But what could they do? They were recruits, the lowest rank possible. Kovac was their superior, a decorated combat veteran with citations and medals. Who would believe them? Who would even listen? The turning point came on week 7. The company was scheduled for night navigation training, a grueling exercise that would take them through the woods surrounding the base using only map and compass. Recruits were divided into pairs, and Sarah found herself partnered with Rodriguez. They were given their coordinates and sent into the darkness, the sounds of the base fading behind them as they entered the tree line. Sarah had always been good with directions, a skill learned from hiking with her father in the Oregon wilderness. She and Jessica moved efficiently through the course, checking their compass bearings and marking waypoints. They were ahead of schedule when they reached checkpoint 3, a small clearing where an instructor was supposed to verify their progress. Kovac was waiting there alone. Well, he said, his voice carrying that edge that made Sarah's skin crawl. The 2-star recruits. You think you're special, don't you? Think you're better than everyone else? Jessica stepped forward, her posture rigid. No, Staff Sergeant. We're just completing the course as ordered. Kovac moved closer, and Sarah noticed he wasn't wearing his usual gear. No radio, no flashlight mounted on his vest, no other instructors in sight. Something was wrong. The checkpoint was supposed to be staffed by 2 instructors. Where was everyone else? See, that's your problem, Rodriguez, Kovac said, circling them like a predator. You don't know your place. You come here thinking you're tough, thinking you can do what men do. But you're weak. All of you are weak. Sarah's heart was pounding. She glanced at Jessica, whose jaw was clenched, eyes straight ahead, trying to follow protocol. Don't engage. Don't escalate. Wait for him to dismiss you. But Kovac wasn't dismissing them. You want to prove you're strong, he said, stopping directly in front of Jessica. Let's see how strong you really are. Give me 50 push-ups. Right now. Full gear. It was a ridiculous order. They were already exhausted from the navigation course, carrying full packs and weapons. But Jessica dropped immediately, beginning the push-ups without complaint. Sarah stood at attention, every instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. Kovac watched Jessica struggle through the push-ups, counting slowly, occasionally saying she wasn't going low enough, making her start over. By the time she reached 30, her arms were shaking. At 40, she could barely push herself up. And then, Kovac stepped forward and placed his boot on her back, adding his weight to the exercise. What's wrong, Rodriguez? I thought you were an athlete. Thought you were tough. Jessica collapsed under the pressure, her face hitting the dirt. Sarah took an automatic step forward, then stopped herself. Every fiber of her being wanted to help, but intervening could make everything worse. This was what Kovac wanted, a reaction, a reason to escalate. Pathetic, Kovac said, removing his boot. Get up. Jessica pushed herself up slowly, dirt covering the side of her face, blood trickling from a split lip where she'd hit the ground. She stood at attention, breathing hard, but her eyes were blazing with barely contained fury. Kovac turned to Sarah. What about you, Chen? You've been real quiet these past weeks. Invisible little mouse. Think I haven't noticed you? He stepped closer, so close Sarah could smell the coffee on his breath. I notice everything. I've been watching you. You're smart, aren't you? Smart enough to know when to keep your mouth shut. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her voice level. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Yes, Staff Sergeant, he mocked. Always so proper. So obedient. His hand came up, and Sarah felt his finger trace along her jaw. She went rigid, every muscle locked. This was wrong. This was so far beyond wrong. This was assault. Staff Sergeant, Jessica's voice cut through the moment. Permission to speak. Kovac's hand dropped, and he turned to face her. Denied. We need to complete the course, Jessica continued, ignoring him. We're behind schedule. The other instructors will notice. For a moment, Kovac's face twisted with rage. Sarah saw his hand clench into a fist, saw the way his body tensed, and she knew with absolute certainty that he was about to hit Jessica. Time seemed to slow down. She saw Jessica brace herself, saw Kovac's arm begin to move, and, without thinking, Sarah spoke. "Our coordinates show checkpoint 4 is 2 clicks north," she said loudly, pulling out her map, stepping between them. "We should log our arrival time and move out. Staff Sergeant, could you verify our waypoint chart?" It was a desperate gamble, forcing him back into his role as instructor, giving him a reason to let them go. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, Kovac laughed, a sound without humor. "Smart," he said. "Real smart. Fine. Log your time and get out of here. But, you remember something, Chen. There's always another checkpoint. Always another dark night in the woods. And, eventually, you're going to be alone." He signed their chart with a violent scrawl and stepped aside. Sarah and Jessica moved quickly, walking at first, then jogging once they were out of sight. Neither spoke until they reached checkpoint 4, where Drill Sergeant Thompson was waiting with a thermos of coffee and a warm smile. "You two are making good time," he said. "Everything okay? You look a little rattled." Sarah and Jessica exchanged glances. This was their moment. They could report what happened, tell Thompson everything. But, even as Sarah opened her mouth, doubt flooded in. What exactly would they say? Kovac had pushed Jessica hard during PT, but that wasn't unusual for drill instructors. He had touched Sarah's face, but so briefly. Would anyone believe them? Would they be taken seriously, or would they be labeled as troublemakers, unable to handle the pressure of basic training? "Just tired, Drill Sergeant," Jessica finally said. "Long course." Thompson studied them for a moment longer, then nodded. "Get some water, verify your next coordinates, and push through. You're doing great." As they moved on to the next checkpoint, Sarah felt the weight of their silence. They had missed their chance. But what choice did they have? They were 7 weeks into a 10-week program. 7 weeks of brutal work, of pushing their bodies and minds to the limit. 7 weeks of trying to prove they belonged here. Speaking up could end it all, could label them as weak, as problems. So they stayed silent. But Sarah couldn't forget Kovac's words, "There's always another checkpoint. Always another dark night." She knew he was right. She knew this wasn't over. What Sarah didn't know was that the worst was yet to come, and that 3 weeks later, in another dark moment, she would have to make a choice that would change everything. The military teaches soldiers to follow orders, to trust their chain of command, to believe that the system will protect them. But what happens when the system fails? What happens when the person meant to train you becomes the person you need protection from? Sarah was about to find out. The following weeks passed in a haze of exhaustion and vigilance. Sarah found herself constantly aware of where Kovac was, planning her movements to avoid being caught alone with him. She wasn't the only one. The female recruits had developed an unspoken system. They traveled in pairs to the bathroom, to equipment rooms, anywhere outside the barracks. They kept watch for each other, signaled warnings with subtle looks and gestures. It was a survival mechanism born from shared fear, and it made Sarah furious that they needed it at all. Week 8 brought weapons qualification, 2 days at the rifle range where recruits would prove their marksmanship skills. Sarah had never fired a gun before basic training, but she discovered she had a natural talent for it. Something about the discipline required, the focus, the mathematical precision of adjusting for wind and distance, appealed to her methodical mind. On the first day of qualification, she scored expert on her first attempt, one of only 3 recruits in the company to do so. Drill Sergeant Martinez shook her hand, genuine pride in his eyes. "Outstanding work, Chen. That's the kind of excellence I expect from every soldier." Even Thompson gave her an encouraging nod. But Kovac's face darkened when he saw her score sheet. That evening, during barracks inspection, he assigned her to latrine duty for a week, citing a dust speck on her footlocker that Sarah knew hadn't been there during her pre-inspection check. It was a petty revenge, but it confirmed what Sarah had suspected: Kovac didn't want them to succeed. He wanted them to fail, to prove his belief that women didn't belong in combat training. Every achievement was a personal insult to him, and he would punish it however he could. Jessica wasn't faring any better. After the night navigation incident, she had changed. The confident athlete who had arrived at basic training had been replaced by someone who looked over her shoulder constantly, who jumped at loud noises, who had dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. Sarah tried to talk to her, but Jessica brushed her off with forced smiles and claims that she was fine, just tired like everyone else. But Sarah knew better. She saw the way Jessica's hands trembled during rifle assembly, the way she flinched whenever Kovac walked past. Something had broken inside her friend, and Sarah felt helpless to fix it. The crisis came during week 9, on what should have been a routine training day. The company was scheduled for a gas chamber exercise, part of chemical warfare training where recruits would experience tear gas while wearing protective masks, then remove the masks briefly to understand the importance of proper equipment use. It was supposed to be controlled, supervised, a learning experience. Kovac volunteered to run the exercise. Sarah stood in line with the other recruits, watching as small groups entered the chamber. She could hear coughing, see recruits stumbling out with streaming eyes and red faces, some vomiting from the exposure. It looked miserable, but it was temporary. Everyone said the effects wore off quickly once you were back in fresh air. When Sarah's group was called, she filed into the chamber with 5 other recruits. The gas quickly filled the small space, and even through her mask, Sarah could feel its effects, her skin tingling, her eyes watering. Then, Kovac's voice boomed through his mask, "Remove your masks on my command. When I say 3, you may replace them and exit. 1, 2. Sarah pulled off her mask, and immediately her world became fire. Her eyes burned, her lungs screamed, mucus poured from her nose. She counted seconds, waiting for Kovac to say 3, to let them replace their masks and escape. But he didn't. 5 seconds passed. 10. 15. Recruits were dropping to their knees, gasping, crying. Sarah kept her eyes shut, trying to breathe in shallow sips through the burning air. 20 seconds. Someone was screaming. 25 seconds. This was wrong. This was far beyond the standard exposure time. 30 seconds. Sarah's lungs felt like they were being torn apart. She reached for her mask, protocol be damned, but Kovac's hand caught her wrist. Did I say 3, recruit? His voice came through his mask, calm and cold. Did I give you permission? Sarah wanted to fight, wanted to rip away from his grip and run, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Her knees were buckling, dark spots appearing in her vision. Just when she thought she would pass out, Kovac finally spoke. 3. Sarah jammed her mask on and stumbled toward the exit, gulping filtered air. Outside, recruits were on their hands and knees, vomiting, crying, some lying flat on their backs trying to breathe. Medics rushed forward with water and cloths, but Sarah could see their faces. They were angry. One of them, a young specialist named Crawford, walked straight toward Kovac as he emerged from the chamber. "What the hell was that, Staff Sergeant?" Crawford demanded. "You had them in there for 45 seconds. Standard protocol is 15, 20 at most. You could have seriously hurt someone." Kovac stepped close to Crawford, using his superior height to intimidate. "Are you questioning my training methods, specialist?" Crawford held his ground. "I'm questioning whether you understand basic safety protocols. Those recruits were in danger of respiratory damage. I'm filing a report." "You do that," Kovac said with a smile. "I'm sure your superiors will be very interested in how a specialist thinks he knows better than a combat veteran staff sergeant about training procedures." The confrontation ended there, but Sarah noticed Crawford did write in his notebook, documenting everything. Maybe someone would finally hold Kovac accountable. Maybe the system would work. It didn't. 2 days later, Specialist Crawford was reassigned to a different base, transferred with 24 hours notice. The official reason was operational needs, but everyone knew the truth. Kovac had connections, friends in the right places, enough influence to make problems disappear. The message was clear: don't challenge him. Don't make waves. Keep your head down and survive your 10 weeks, because no one was coming to help. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling. 9 weeks down, 1 to go. Just one more week and she would be done with basic training, done with Kovac, moving on to advanced individual training where new instructors would take over. She could survive 1 more week. She just had to stay invisible, stay safe, stay quiet. But fate had other plans. Week 10 began with the final major test, the night infiltration course. Each recruit would low-crawl through an obstacle course while live rounds fired overhead, simulating combat conditions. It was the culmination of everything they'd learned, a test of courage and discipline under pressure. Recruits would go through individually, one at a time, at 10-minute intervals throughout the night. Sarah drew one of the late slots, scheduled for 0200 hours. She tried to sleep before her turn, but nerves kept her awake. At 1:30, she got up, gathered her gear, and made her way to the course. The base was quiet, most recruits already finished with their runs. Only a handful remained, waiting in the staging area for their turns. Drill Sergeant Martinez was there, checking off names on his roster. Chen, you're up in 20. Get your gear checked and be ready. He turned to the other recruits. Thompson and I need to verify something at the armory. Should be back in 15. Kovac's up at the course, he'll run your infiltrations until we return. Sarah's stomach dropped. Of course. Of course it would be Kovac alone at the course in the middle of the night, with only a handful of recruits left. She considered asking to wait for Martinez's return, but what reason could she give? She'd look weak, scared. And maybe she was wrong. Maybe with so few people left, Kovac would just run the exercise by the book and be done with it. When Martinez and Thompson left, heading toward the armory, Sarah and the 3 remaining recruits stood in uneasy silence. 2 of the others were male recruits who seemed unconcerned, joking quietly about finally finishing basic training. The third was Emma Michaels, the recruit who Kovac had cornered in the equipment room weeks earlier. Emma caught Sarah's eye, and Sarah saw her own fear reflected back. Recruit Chen. Kovac's voice crackled over the radio. You're up. Report to the start line. Sarah grabbed her rifle and helmet, checking to make sure her chin strap was secure. Emma touched her arm briefly. Be careful, she whispered. The infiltration course stretched across 200 meters of open ground, with barbed wire strung low and machine guns mounted at intervals, firing live ammunition 3 feet above the ground. The idea was simple: stay low, move forward, don't stand up. Recruits had been through the course in daylight during dry runs, but doing it at night with live fire overhead was different. Your mind played tricks on you, made you want to panic, to run. The key was controlling your fear. Sarah approached the start line where Kovac waited. The machine guns weren't firing yet, they only activated when a recruit entered the course. Kovac stood with his arms crossed, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read in the dim light. Ready for your final test, Chen? He asked. Yes, Staff Sergeant, Sarah replied, dropping into a prone position at the start line. Kovac crouched beside her. You know, I've been thinking about you. Thinking about how you've slipped through this whole training cycle without really being tested. You're smart, you keep your head down, you follow rules. But I don't think you have what it takes. Not really. Sarah kept her eyes forward, focusing on the course ahead. Don't engage. Just complete the course and get away from him. I've seen hundreds of recruits come through here, Kovac continued. You know what separates the real soldiers from the pretenders? Real soldiers don't hide. They don't use tricks and cleverness to avoid confrontation. They face it head on. I'm ready to complete the course, Staff Sergeant, Sarah said firmly. Kovac smiled. Oh, you'll complete it. But let's make sure it's a real test. Let's see what you're really made of. He stood and walked to the machine gun control panel. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, go. Sarah launched forward, low-crawling as fast as she could. The machine guns roared to life, and she heard the distinct crack of live rounds passing overhead. She kept her head down, using her elbows and knees to propel herself forward under the barbed wire. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear. She'd trained for this. She could do this. 50 meters in, she realized something was wrong. The gunfire pattern wasn't right. During the daytime runs, the machine guns fired in steady, predictable bursts. But now they seemed erratic, the rounds coming lower than they should. She heard one impact the dirt just inches to her left, then another to her right. These weren't warning shots. These were aimed. Sarah froze, pressing herself flat against the ground. This wasn't training. This was attempted murder. Kovac was manually controlling the guns, adjusting their aim, trying to hit her. The realization was so terrifying, so surreal, that for a moment she couldn't move. Then, survival instinct kicked in. She couldn't go forward, the rounds were too close. She couldn't go back, that would mean crawling toward Kovac. Her only option was to stay perfectly still and hope he couldn't see her in the dark. She lay there, feeling the vibration of bullets impacting the ground around her, wondering if this was how she would die, shot by her own drill instructor on a training course, another tragic accident that would be covered up and forgotten. Then, the guns stopped. Silence fell over the course, broken only by Sarah's ragged breathing. She waited, listening. Footsteps. Someone was walking onto the course. Toward her. Chen, Kovac's voice called out. You okay? The guns malfunctioned. Stay down, I'm coming to get you. Sarah didn't believe him for a second. If the guns had malfunctioned, protocol required him to call for backup, to wait for other instructors, to evacuate the course safely. But he was walking toward her alone, in the dark, with live machine guns surrounding them. She heard his footsteps getting closer. Saw his silhouette blocking out the stars. And then, she understood, he was going to kill her. He would claim it was an accident, a tragic malfunction during night training. No witnesses except the recruits waiting at the start line, too far away to see what really happened. And everyone would believe him, the decorated combat veteran, over a dead recruit who couldn't defend herself. Kovac was standing over her now. Get up, he said quietly. Sarah knew if she stood up, she was dead. The moment she stood, she would be a clear target for the malfunctioning guns. So she stayed down. I said get up, recruit. That's an order. Sarah's mind raced. Every option seemed to end with her death or his. If she refused, he could physically force her up. If she complied, the guns would kill her. But there was one thing she could try, one split-second chance. Yes, Staff Sergeant, she said, and began to rise slowly. But as she pushed up from the ground, she shifted her weight, twisted her body, and swept her leg out in a move she'd learned in hand-to-hand combat training. It was a basic technique, taught to every recruit, designed to knock an opponent off balance. But Sarah added something extra, something not taught in basic training, something she'd learned growing up in her parents' restaurant where she'd taken self-defense classes after a customer got aggressive with her mother. As Kovac stumbled backward, Sarah followed through, driving her fist upward in a perfect strike to his solar plexus, just below the sternum. It was one strike. One perfect, precise strike delivered with every ounce of strength she had. Kovac's eyes went wide. He gasped, trying to breathe, his diaphragm spasming from the impact. He fell backward, hitting the ground hard. Sarah stood over him, shaking, horrified at what she'd done. She had struck a superior officer. She had assaulted her drill instructor. Even if she explained, even if she told them he'd tried to kill her, who would believe her? It would be his word against hers, and she had just guaranteed that everyone would see her as the aggressor. Help! The cry came from the start line. Emma Michaels was running toward them, with the two male recruits behind her. They had seen Kovac fall. They had witnessed everything. Sarah stood frozen as they approached, unable to move, unable to think. This was it. Her life was over. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd endured, ended because she had defended herself against an instructor trying to kill her. But Emma reached them first, and her first words weren't what Sarah expected. "Oh my God," Emma said, kneeling beside Kovac. "He's been shot." Sarah blinked, confused. "What?" "No, look." Emma pointed to Kovac's leg, where blood was spreading across his uniform. One of the machine gun rounds had hit him. Either it had ricocheted when Sarah knocked him down, or it had been coming for them both. But there was a bullet wound, clear evidence that the guns had been firing dangerously low. The next few hours passed in a blur. Medics arrived, called by Emma on the emergency radio. Martinez and Thompson came running from the armory, faces pale with shock at the scene before them, Kovac on the ground with a gunshot wound, Sarah standing over him shaking, evidence that the machine guns had fired wildly across the infiltration course. An investigation was launched immediately. Sarah was separated from the other recruits and taken to a private room where she gave her statement to a criminal investigation command agent, a serious woman with kind eyes named Agent Patricia Walsh. Sarah told her everything: the harassment that started from week 1, the incident during night navigation, the gas chamber abuse, Crawford's attempted report and sudden transfer, and, finally, what happened on the infiltration course. Agent Walsh listened without interruption, taking notes on a laptop. When Sarah finished, exhausted and terrified, Walsh looked at her directly. "You understand how serious these allegations are?" Walsh said. "You're accusing a decorated staff sergeant of attempted murder." "I know what it sounds like," Sarah said quietly. "I know nobody will believe me. But it's the truth. He's been targeting female recruits since day one. I'm not the only one who can tell you this." "You're not," Walsh agreed, surprising her. "We've received 3 other statements already. Emma Michaels, Jessica Rodriguez, and one of the male witnesses from tonight, Private David Santos. All corroborating different aspects of your account. And there's more you don't know about yet." Walsh opened a folder and spread several documents across the table. Specialist Crawford didn't just transfer quietly. He filed his report before he left, sent it to multiple recipients including the Inspector General's office. It was sitting in a queue, waiting for review. Your incident tonight moved it to top priority. We pulled Kovac's complete service record, and some interesting things emerged. Sarah leaned forward, hardly daring to hope. "Kovac has been a drill instructor for 6 years at 3 different bases," Walsh continued. "At each location, there were complaints. Nothing that stuck, nothing officially substantiated, but a pattern. Female recruits reporting harassment, unsafe training practices, retaliation against those who spoke up. Each time, investigations would stall. Witnesses would recant or transfer. Evidence would be insufficient. Kovac would receive a light reprimand and move to a new base. How did he keep getting away with it?" Sarah asked. Walsh's expression darkened. "Several reasons. He's a combat veteran with a Silver Star. He has friends in high places who protected him. And, honestly, the military has historically been very bad at addressing this kind of abuse. Too many people willing to look the other way, to believe the accused over the accusers, to prioritize unit cohesion over justice. So nothing will change," Sarah said bitterly. "He'll get another slap on the wrist and move to another base." "Not this time," Walsh said firmly. "This time is different because of what happened tonight. We have physical evidence. The machine gun control panel shows manual adjustments to the firing pattern, lowering the trajectory below safe levels. We have the bullet wound in Kovac's leg from his own adjusted fire. We have multiple witnesses who saw him walk onto an active course, violating every safety protocol. And we have his own words, recorded on the course radio system. He didn't realize the emergency channel auto-records all communications for safety review." Walsh pulled out a small digital recorder and pressed play. Sarah heard her own voice saying, "I'm ready to complete the course, Staff Sergeant," followed by Kovac's response, "Oh, you'll complete it. But let's make sure it's a real test. Let's see what you're really made of." That statement, combined with the manual gun adjustments made immediately after, establishes premeditation, Walsh explained. He deliberately created dangerous conditions. Whether he intended to kill you or just terrorize you into quitting is almost irrelevant legally. The moment he adjusted those guns, he committed assault with a deadly weapon on a soldier under his command. Sarah felt tears starting, a mixture of relief and residual fear. So he'll actually face consequences? He'll face a court-martial, Walsh confirmed. And, based on what we're uncovering, he'll likely spend significant time in military prison. But, I need you to understand something, Sarah. This is going to be hard. Really hard. Kovac's defense team will try to paint you as the aggressor. They'll focus on the fact that you struck him. They'll claim he was trying to help you off the course when you attacked him. You'll have to testify, relive everything, face his attorneys trying to tear apart your credibility. Are you prepared for that? Sarah thought about Jessica's haunted eyes, Emma's whispered warning, all the other recruits who had suffered under Kovac's abuse. She thought about her father's words before she left for basic training: being strong doesn't mean never being afraid. It means doing what's right even when you are afraid. I'm prepared, Sarah said. Whatever it takes. The court-martial took place 6 months later. Sarah had completed basic training under a new set of drill instructors, with Martinez taking over as senior lead. The remaining weeks had been different, evidence that good leadership existed even in the harsh environment of military training. She graduated with honors, scored expert in marksmanship, and was selected for advanced training in military intelligence. But, before she could move forward, she had to face backward. The courtroom at Fort Jackson was packed: military attorneys, investigators, reporters who had gotten wind of the case, and dozens of former recruits from Kovac's 6 years as a drill instructor. Walsh had been right about one thing: the investigation had opened floodgates. Once word spread that someone was actually listening, more victims came forward. 37 formal complaints were filed, detailing years of abuse, harassment, and misconduct. Sarah took the stand on the second day of the trial. Kovac sat at the defense table, his face impassive, one leg still bandaged from the gunshot wound. He wore his dress uniform with all his medals, looking every inch the decorated soldier. Sarah wore her Class A uniform as well, but she felt small and exposed as the defense attorney approached. Private Chen, the attorney began, his voice smooth and skeptical. You claim Staff Sergeant Kovac attempted to kill you on the infiltration course. Is that correct? Yes, sir, Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. Yet you have no proof of his intent, do you? No statement where he explicitly said he wanted you dead? He adjusted the machine guns to fire directly at me. He violated every safety protocol by walking onto an active course. And, when I didn't stand up on command, when you refused a direct order, the attorney interrupted. You, a recruit in basic training, refused an order from your superior officer. Is that the action of someone who respects the chain of command? When the order is designed to get you killed, yes, Sarah replied. The military teaches us to follow lawful orders. An order to stand up in front of machine guns firing live ammunition is not lawful. The attorney's expression flickered with annoyance. And then, you struck Staff Sergeant Kovac. A combat veteran, your superior officer. You assaulted him. I defended myself using techniques taught to me in hand-to-hand combat training. One strike to disable an aggressor. That's exactly what the Army taught me to do when faced with a physical threat. A threat? Staff Sergeant Kovac was trying to help you off the course after a dangerous malfunction. Then, why did he manually adjust the guns to fire low? Why did he walk onto the course alone without calling for backup? Why did multiple other recruits report similar patterns of harassment and dangerous training practices? Sarah leaned forward. And, why did he get shot by his own adjusted gunfire if he wasn't standing somewhere he shouldn't have been? The attorney had no response to that. The evidence was overwhelming. The machine gun logs, the radio recordings, the testimony of dozens of other victims, all painted the same picture: a predator who had used his position of authority to abuse and endanger soldiers under his command for years. The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts: assault, conduct unbecoming an officer, dereliction of duty, and multiple counts of abuse of authority. Staff Sergeant Derek Kovac was sentenced to 12 years in military prison, dishonorable discharge, and forfeiture of all benefits and rank. As military police led him away, Kovac looked directly at Sarah. She expected hatred, anger, threats. But what she saw was something else: resignation. He had finally been stopped, and some part of him seemed to know he deserved it. Outside the courthouse, Sarah was surrounded by reporters. She gave a brief statement, thanking the investigators and expressing hope that the military would implement better systems to protect soldiers from abuse. But what she really wanted to say, what she did say to the small group of former recruits who had testified, was simpler. You were heard. Your stories mattered. And, because you had the courage to come forward, nobody else will suffer the way we did. That's what real strength looks like. Jessica Rodriguez, who had testified about her own experiences, hugged Sarah tightly. We did it, she whispered. We actually did it. Emma Michaels wiped tears from her eyes. My little sister starts basic training next month. I was terrified for her. But, now, because of this, she'll be safer. They all will be. And that was true. The Kovac case, as it became known, sparked major reforms in military training protocols. New oversight systems were implemented, requiring multiple instructors present during night exercises and isolated training scenarios. A confidential reporting system was established, allowing recruits to report abuse without fear of retaliation. And, perhaps most importantly, a culture shift began, one that prioritized soldier safety and accountability over protecting the reputations of abusive leaders. Sarah completed her advanced training and served 4 years in military intelligence, eventually reaching the rank of sergeant herself. She never forgot those 10 weeks of basic training, never forgot the fear or the moment when she had to make an impossible choice between obedience and survival. But she also never forgot the strength she discovered in that moment, the knowledge that sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do. Years later, now working as a civilian defense contractor, Sarah received a letter from a young woman named Private Maya Thompson. The letter was brief but heartfelt. Sergeant Chen, I just completed basic training at Fort Jackson. During our first day, our drill instructors told us about the reforms that came after the Kovac case. They told us about a recruit who had the courage to stand up to abuse, who defended herself and then fought to make sure the truth came out. They didn't mention your name, said it was policy to protect privacy, but I researched and found the court records. I wanted to write to thank you. I wanted you to know that because of your courage, my basic training was tough but fair. I was pushed to my limits, but I was never afraid of my instructors. I was never harassed. I was treated like a soldier, not a target. That's because of you. You saved more people than you'll ever know, people you'll never meet, soldiers who will serve their country without having to survive abuse first. Thank you. Sarah kept that letter in her desk drawer, reading it whenever she felt discouraged about the state of the world. It reminded her that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. It's about speaking truth even when silence would be easier. It's about one perfect strike, delivered at exactly the right moment, that changes everything. The military teaches many lessons: discipline, loyalty, honor. But the most important lesson Sarah learned wasn't in any training manual. It was that the system is made of people, and people have the power to change it. All it takes is someone willing to stand up, to speak out, to refuse to accept that abuse is just part of the process. Sarah Chen arrived at basic training as a quiet girl from Oregon who wanted to help her family and serve her country. She left as a soldier who understood that true strength comes not from following orders blindly, but from having the courage to question them when they're wrong. She learned that sometimes the chain of command breaks, and, when it does, you have to be brave enough to fix it yourself. That lesson served her throughout her military career and beyond. But, more than that, it gave her a sense of purpose. She became an advocate for military reform, working with organizations dedicated to eliminating abuse and harassment in the armed forces. She mentored young female soldiers, teaching them that they had every right to serve with dignity and respect. And she never stopped telling her story, because stories have power. They inspire others to find their own courage, to take their own perfect strike against injustice. The drill instructor attacked. She responded with one perfect strike. But the real victory wasn't that single moment of self-defense. It was everything that came after: the decision to speak truth, the determination to see justice done, the courage to face a system that wanted her to stay quiet, and the strength to help build a better future for every soldier who came after her. That's the story Sarah Chen tells when people ask her about basic training. Not about the violence or the fear, though those were real. But about the moment when she discovered that being a soldier meant more than following orders. It meant protecting others, fighting for what's right, and never accepting that abuse is just the price of service. One perfect strike changed the trajectory of one man's ability to hurt others. But the courage to speak up afterward changed an entire system. And that, Sarah learned, is true power. Not the ability to hurt, but the willingness to stand against those who do, no matter the cost. That's what makes a real soldier. That's what makes a hero. The girl who arrived at Fort Jackson scared and uncertain left as a woman who knew her own strength. And, in the years since, she's helped countless others discover theirs. Because that's what survivors do: they survive, they heal, and then they make sure nobody else has to suffer the way they did. The military is better because Sarah Chen refused to stay silent. And, somewhere, recruits going through basic training today are safer because one woman decided that enough was enough. That's the real story. That's the real victory. One perfect strike, followed by the courage to ensure it meant something.